Okay, so today we're diving into some pretty complex stuff.
Yeah.
Kleros and decentralized justice.
Hmm.
We've got a white paper here, and essentially
Right.
it lays out the system for resolving disputes online, but instead of judges and courtrooms, it uses blockchain tech and a bit of game theory.
Yeah, that's right. And the white paper really highlights why this is so important now.
Yeah.
Traditional legal systems, they're just not built for the speed and scale of our digital lives.
Exactly. What happens when you're in a disagreement online and you need a fair resolution, but going to court is too expensive and time-consuming?
Right.
Like the white paper gives this example of Alice and Bob.
Yeah.
Alice hires Bob to build her website, but the final product is a total mess. Nothing like what they agreed on.
Mm.
What can Alice do?
Well, that's where Kleros comes in.
Okay.
Think of it like a digital courthouse built on the Ethereum blockchain.
So who are the judges in this digital courthouse?
Right.
Is it all just algorithms making decisions?
It's actually pretty ingenious. Instead of judges, you have this system of randomly selected jurors.
Okay.
Anyone with relevant expertise can become a juror by staking Kleros' native token, PNK.
So if I think I know a thing or two about websites,
Hey,
I could be a juror in Alice and Bob's case.
Yeah.
But wouldn't there be a risk of bias?
Sure.
If I could just choose to be a juror in cases that benefit me.
That's where the random selection comes in.
Yeah.
You don't get to pick and choose your cases. Plus, there's a financial incentive for jurors, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
They could actually lose their staked tokens if they consistently vote against the majority.
Okay, so there's real skin in the game.
Right.
It's not just about clicking a button.
Exactly.
But how does this whole process actually play out?
Okay.
Walk us through it step by step.
Sure, let's stick with Alice and Bob's website dispute.
Okay.
They've tried to work it out themselves, but they're at an impasse.
Right.
So Alice submits the dispute to Kleros, specifically to the website quality subcourt.
Subcourt. So there are different courts for different types of disputes.
Exactly.
Okay.
It wouldn't make sense for someone with expertise in, say, copyright law to be ruling on a website design case.
Right.
So Kleros has these specialized subcourts.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Alice's case goes to the website quality subcourt.
Right.
What happens next?
The system randomly selects a group of jurors from the pool of those who stake PNK tokens in that subcourt.
Okay.
The jurors review the evidence. Alice and Bob have submitted things like their initial contract screenshots of the website, maybe even their communication logs.
Sounds a lot like a traditional court case so far, just with everything happening online.
Right, but here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The jurors vote in secret, meaning they don't know how the other jurors are voting.
Why is that so important?
Well, this is where game theory kicks in, specifically the concept of the Schelling point.
Okay.
Think of it like this. You're a juror, and you're essentially playing a game where honesty has the highest chance of winning you rewards.
Mm-hmm.
That's the power of the Schelling point. You don't know the other jurors, but you assume they're all rational and want to maximize their chances of keeping their tokens and getting paid.
Right.
So the most logical move is to vote honestly,
Right.
because that's likely what everyone else is doing.
And like a self-enforcing system of honesty built on incentives.
Exactly.
I like it. But what if, say, Bob doesn't agree with the ruling?
Sure.
Does he just have to suck it up and accept it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There's a system for appeals, but it gets progressively more expensive with each appeal.
Mm-hmm.
The thinking is, if you genuinely believe you're right,
Yeah.
you'll be willing to pay more for a larger pool of jurors to review your case.
Mm.
But if you're just trying to game the system, you'll eventually hit a point where it's just not financially worth it.
So it disincentivizes frivolous appeals.
Exactly.
That's actually really clever.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered how Kleros could help resolve Alice and Bob's website drama.
Right.
But is that all it can do? What other kinds of disputes can it handle?
The possibilities are really vast.
Mm.
The white paper highlights things like decentralized escrow services,
Okay.
which you could use for any online transaction.
Escrow services. It rings a bell, but refresh my memory.
Sure.
Explain it like I've never heard of it.
Okay, so let's say you're buying something online from a seller you've never met before.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, there's some risk involved.
Right.
With an escrow service, instead of sending your money directly to the seller, you put it into a secure account held by a neutral third party.
Okay.
The funds are only released when both you and the seller agree that the transaction is complete.
So it's like having a trusted middleman
Right.
to protect both the buyer and seller.
Exactly.
Yeah, wouldn't that still require a lot of trust in that third party?
That's where Kleros comes in.
Okay.
It can act as that neutral third party,
Okay.
but instead of relying on a single company or individual, It's powered by this decentralized network of jurors.
Okay.
So if there's a dispute, like you claim the seller never shipped your item, or the seller claims you're making stuff up, Kleros can step in and resolve it.
This sounds promising,
Hmm.
but isn't insurance all about assessing individual risk?
Uh,
Could a system like this really handle something as complex as insurance?
that's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what Kleros is trying to achieve.
Okay.
The white paper explores the concept of decentralized insurance,
Hmm.
where you could pool your risk with others on the blockchain,
Right.
cutting out the big insurance companies and potentially making insurance more affordable and accessible.
Okay.
Of course, there's still challenges to figure out, but the potential is there.
Okay. My mind is officially blown, but before we go any further down this rabbit hole, I need to ask, could this really be fair? What's stopping someone from, say, buying a ton of PNK tokens and trying to influence the system in their favor?
That's a valid concern,
Yeah.
but the white paper addresses it head on.
Okay.
Remember, the cost of appeals increases exponentially.
Yeah.
That's a key safeguard.
Yes.
The more jurors involved in a case, the more expensive it becomes to try and manipulate the outcome.
Right.
Plus, even if someone managed to control a smaller subcourt, they'd likely be challenged at a higher level. The system is designed to make that kind of manipulation extremely difficult and expensive.
It sounds like they've put a lot of thought into preventing that kind of abuse.
Yeah.
This is fascinating stuff. But before we get too carried away, are there any potential downsides to this system?
Well, no system is perfect.
Hmm.
One issue raised in the white paper is privacy.
Okay.
Some disputes might involve sharing sensitive information, and figuring out how to keep that data confidential within a decentralized system is an ongoing challenge.
That makes sense. Not everything should be blasted out to the entire internet.
Right.
What other potential issues are there?
Another challenge is ensuring the random number generation for selecting jurors is truly tamper-proof.
Okay.
If someone could predict or manipulate that process, it would undermine the entire system.
Right.
They're currently using a system based on Ethereum's block hashes, but they acknowledge that it might need to evolve over time to stay ahead of any potential vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So kind of like an arms race between the developers and any potential attackers who might try to exploit the system?
In a way, yes.
Okay.
But remember, the beauty of decentralization is that the system is designed to be resistant to attacks in the first place.
Okay, so we've covered how Kleros works some of its potential applications and even touched on some of the challenges it faces.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to take in, but I'm already seeing the potential here.
You've only just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to unpack, so let's continue this deep dive in part 2.
Absolutely. I can't wait to delve deeper into this world of decentralized justice. We'll be back soon with part 2 of our Kleros deep dive.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. Last time we explored how Kleros turns dispute resolution into like this game of incentives,
Right.
using blockchain tech and game theory to create a surprisingly fair system.
That's right, and it's fascinating how they've managed to translate those real-world legal concepts into a digital environment.
Absolutely. But before we go any further, there's one thing I'm still a bit fuzzy on. We talked about subcourts dedicated to different types of disputes.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit more about how these subcourts are created and managed?
It's actually a very democratic process.
Okay.
Remember those PNK token holders we talked about?
Yeah.
The folks who stake their tokens to become potential jurors?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they play a key role in shaping the Kleros ecosystem.
So it's not just some central authority dictating how things should run?
Not at all.
Okay.
The PNK token holders get to vote on key decisions,
Okay.
like creating new subcourts,
Yeah.
setting the fees for those courts, and even determining the minimum number of tokens required to participate as a juror in a specific subcourt.
It's like a mini society within Kleros with its own system of governance.
Precisely. The white paper really emphasizes that Kleros is all about decentralization, giving the community the power to shape its own future.
So theoretically, if there's enough demand, we could see subcourts for almost anything. Like, could I propose a subcourt for settling arguments about the best pizza toppings?
Well, in theory, yes. As long as you can convince enough PNK token holders that your pizza topping dispute resolution court is a valuable addition to the ecosystem, you could absolutely make it happen.
Okay, that's amazing. But let's get back to some of the more serious challenges we touched on earlier.
Right.
Privacy, for example. How does Kleros handle sensitive information, especially when dealing with disputes that might involve confidential data?
The white paper outlines a system based on encryption and hashing to protect sensitive information. Imagine it like this.
Hmm.
You have a locked box containing all the confidential details of a case.
Okay.
Only the parties involved and the selected jurors have the keys to open that box.
So instead of having everything out in the open on the blockchain, the sensitive stuff is kept under wraps, accessible only to those who need to see it.
Exactly. Everyone else just sees an encrypted version of the data on the blockchain, which is essentially meaningless to them.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the other challenge we mentioned?
Right.
Making sure the random number generation for juror selection is truly tamper-proof. I mean, that seems crucial for maintaining fairness.
You're right, it's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Currently, Kleros uses a system based on Ethereum's block hashes for generating random numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like flipping a coin, but instead of relying on physical randomness, it uses the unpredictable nature of blockchain transactions.
But couldn't someone with enough technical know-how potentially figure out a way to manipulate that process?
It's definitely a concern, and the white paper acknowledges that the current system might not be foolproof in the long run to address this. They're exploring more robust methods, like something called sequential proof of work.
Okay, you lost me a bit there. Can you explain that in a way that my non-technical brain can grasp?
Imagine a lock that gets progressively harder to pick with each attempt.
Okay.
That's essentially what sequential proof of work aims to achieve. It involves a series of complex calculations that make it incredibly difficult and computationally expensive to influence the random number generation.
So it's like a constant arms race with the Kleros team trying to stay one step ahead of any potential attackers.
You could say that, but remember, the beauty of a decentralized system like Kleros is that there's no single point of failure. Even if one part of the system were to be compromised, the rest would remain intact.
This whole thing is just so incredibly mind-boggling. It's amazing to think that we're using blockchain technology to build a justice system for the digital age.
It really is a testament to the power of human ingenuity, and we're only just scratching the surface of what's possible.
Speaking of possibilities, we've talked about resolving online disputes and creating secure escrow systems.
Right.
What other applications are there for Kleros? I mean, the white paper hints at some pretty exciting potential use cases, right?
Absolutely. One area that particularly caught my eye was the use of Kleros to curate lists.
Okay.
Think of it like a decentralized version of Yelp or TripAdvisor. But instead of relying on subjective reviews, you have a system where inclusion or exclusion from a list is determined by a fair and transparent process.
Okay, give me an example of how that might work in practice.
Imagine you have a list of verified online retailers, or maybe a list of reputable charities.
Okay.
Maintaining such lists fairly and transparently can be incredibly challenging.
Right.
Kleros could be used to handle disputes about which organizations should be included or excluded.
Mm-hmm.
It would essentially become a decentralized system for building trust and reputation.
So instead of relying on a single company or organization to decide who's in and who's out, you have this decentralized system that's governed by the community itself.
That's the idea. And the same concept could be applied to other areas like creating blacklists of known scammers or even managing intellectual property rights.
Wow, the possibilities seem endless. I'm already starting to see how Kleros could be used to solve problems that we haven't even thought of yet. But before we get too carried away with all these future possibilities, I'm curious to hear more about how Kleros is being used in the real world today.
Sure.
Are there any concrete examples of this technology actually working?
Absolutely. We already mentioned the escrow service, which is up and running, but there's also something called a token curated registry, or TCR for short.
Okay, that's a new one. What exactly is a token curated registry?
It's essentially a list of tokens that meet specific criteria, kind of like a quality control system for the crypto world.
Okay.
Anyone can challenge the inclusion or exclusion of a token on the list, which triggers a Kleros dispute resolution process.
So instead of relying on some centralized authority to decide which tokens are legit and which ones aren't, you have this decentralized system that relies on the wisdom of the crowd.
Exactly. And that's just one example. We're already seeing Kleros being used in a variety of ways, and as the technology matures, I think we'll see even more innovative applications emerge.
This is all incredibly exciting, and I'm eager to hear more about what the future holds for Kleros, but I think we should save that discussion for part 3 of our deep dive.
Agreed. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still much more to explore.
Stay tuned for the final part of our Kleros deep dive, where we'll delve into the potential long-term impact of this groundbreaking technology. Welcome back to the deep dive. We spent the last 2 parts really unpacking Kleros, this fascinating system for decentralized justice, going from how it actually works to some,
Right.
pretty amazing real-world examples.
It's really impressive how they've managed to combine blockchain technology with game theory to create a system that's both efficient and surprisingly fair.
Right. But now I'm curious, what does the future hold for something like this? Is Kleros really going to change how we think about justice?
Right.
Or is it just like a cool experiment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The white paper hints at some pretty ambitious goals, but it's important to remember that Kleros is still in its early stages.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a seed that has the potential to grow into a mighty tree,
Okay.
but it needs the right conditions to thrive.
Okay, so what are those conditions? What needs to happen for Kleros to really reach its full potential?
Well, wider adoption is key.
Okay,
The more people use Kleros, the stronger and more resilient it becomes.
that makes sense. It's like anything else, the more people buy into it,
Ex-
the more valuable it becomes. But it's not just about the numbers, right? It also matters what people are actually using Kleros for.
Absolutely. Right now, most of the use cases are relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
Things like escrow payments and token curation.
Right?
But as the system matures and gains more trust, we could see it being used for much more complex disputes.
Like what? Give me some examples that would really shake things up.
Imagine a world where Kleros is used to resolve intellectual property disputes,
Okay.
or even help settle international trade disagreements.
Wow, that's some next level stuff.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you need serious legal expertise for cases like that? I mean, can a bunch of random people on the internet really replace lawyers and judges?
Not necessarily, and that's where the idea of layered justice comes in.
Okay.
Kleros doesn't have to completely replace our existing legal systems. Instead, it could act as a complementary layer, handling smaller disputes quickly and efficiently,
Okay.
freeing up traditional courts to focus on the really complex cases.
So it's not about Claris versus the courts. It's more about finding ways for them to work together, each playing to their strengths.
Exactly, and that's where things get really interesting. Imagine a future where Kleros rulings could actually be recognized by traditional courts,
Wow.
creating a seamless bridge between the digital and physical worlds of justice.
That would be incredible. It would make access to justice so much easier and more affordable for everyone, regardless of where they live or how much money they have.
Precisely. And it's not just about traditional justice systems either.
Yeah.
Kleros could also play a huge role in the governance of decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs.
Okay, we touched on DAOs earlier,
Right.
but I'll admit I'm still not entirely sure what they are or how they work.
Think of a DAO like a company or organization that's run entirely on the internet without the need for traditional managers or CEOs.
So it's like a company governed by code instead of people.
In a way, yes, the rules of the DAO are encoded on the blockchain, and those rules can be changed or updated by the DAO's members, often through some form of voting.
But even in a DAO, you're bound to have disagreements, right? So where does Kleros fit in?
That's exactly where it shines. Kleros could provide a neutral and transparent way to resolve disputes within DAOs,
Okay.
ensuring that everything runs smoothly and fairly.
It's like having a built-in justice system for the future of organizations.
Exactly. And that brings us to what I think is the most exciting aspect of Kleros. Its potential to help create a more just and equitable society.
Okay. I'm all ears. Tell me more about that.
Imagine a world where access to justice is no longer a privilege for the wealthy or well-connected, but a fundamental right available to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
A world where disputes are resolved quickly and fairly without the need for expensive lawyers or years of drawn-out litigation.
That does sound pretty utopian, but could Kleros really make that kind of difference?
Well, it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
By removing the barriers that prevent so many people from accessing justice,
Right.
Kleros could empower individuals and level the playing field, giving everyone a voice in matters that affect them.
I can definitely see how that would be incredibly empowering, especially for people who've been marginalized or excluded by traditional justice systems.
Exactly, and that's why I believe Kleros is so much more than just a technology. It's a tool for social change,
Wow.
a potential catalyst for creating a more just and equitable world.
Wow. This has been an incredible journey. We've gone from the nitty-gritty details of how Kleros works
Right.
to exploring its, mind-blowing potential to reshape how we think about justice and governance.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, and I'm genuinely excited to see what the future holds for Kleros.
Me too. And for you listening, if you're as intrigued by this technology as we are, I encourage you to do your own research. Check out the Kleros website, explore the white paper, and see if this might be something you could even use yourself.
There's a whole world of possibilities out there just waiting to be discovered.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.